Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. A little later in the program, we're going to talk about a new website for you. No, it's more news. You might like it. We'll find out. But first, as we still reel from what happened a couple weeks ago, I've heard that we don't have enough money in education. This is the man who's going to explain that to me because it must be true. Ross Izard from our Education Center at the Independence Institute. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We have a dangerous job to do, you and I. We are going to talk about budgetary issues, and there are only 20 people watching. If at the end of this conversation there are still 20 people watching, that's it. We win.
Yeah.
We win. So we're going to see. So keep your clickers on this. One of the biggest drivers of the state budget and local budgets is education spending. And as you know, there ain't enough of it. And we have this thing called the School Finance Act. Right? We've lost one viewer already. We have this thing called the School Finance Act, and it dictates so much of Colorado politics and what goes on at the Gold Dome and what happens in your local schools, and nobody knows what the hell it is. What is it?
All right, so the School Finance Act, and I'll preface this by saying it's only part of this. So I think before you can have the honest conversation, you've got to be able to talk about where that fits, because that's not all the money that's flowing into it. But the School Finance Act of 1994 is sort of this zombie bill that's been stumbling along for a long time now. It's the same basic formula.
You say bill or is it a law?
It's a law. Yeah,
okay.
Sorry about that. So we've got School Finance Act. We keep on revising it. We change it a little bit every year, but functionally it's the same basic idea that we had back in sort of the early to mid 90s. So what it does is it lays out a base level of per pupil funding. There goes another viewer right there. But basically this is the amount of money per kid that a school district is going to get. That's the base amount. And then they have a number of factors on top of that. And the factors deal with things like if the kid is at risk, which really means low income, deals with the size of the district, personnel costs in the district, all of that kind of stuff. And what those things do is they adjust through the formula the money that you get per kid up or down. And so as a result, you've got in some districts per pupil revenues that are in the neighborhood of about $7,000 per kid. You have other districts where just under the Finance Act you've got about $15,000 per kid. So it varies a lot.
$15,000 per kid?
Yeah, but that's not even close to how big it gets. So this is the important piece. So the School Finance Act is what everybody wants to talk about. This year it's about $6.4 billion. The average in the state's about $7,400 per kid. But like I said, it varies a lot.
Slow down there.
Okay.
So it takes on average $7,400 per kid in Colorado. That's the per pupil cost. What does it cost? Costs $7,400. Is that the right number?
I don't think so. I mean, cost and how much money we put toward it is different, right? So we could talk about how much it costs to educate a kid versus how much money we're spending to educate a kid, and those are different conversations.
How is that a different conversation? What are you, some kind of wonk? How much do we spend to educate a kid?
So if you want to just look at the full revenue, everything. So School Finance Act is just what we give to it under that act. Everything else that flows into it. So extra local money, federal money, all sorts of stuff that we don't normally talk about when we talk about this stuff. That works out to a couple years ago, the last year that we have complete data for, $10.5 billion a year. It's about $12,500 per kid.
Time out. Because I heard the superintendent of DPS schools thanking everybody and on radio talking about how little we get. Said we had one of the lowest in the country given we're such a wealthy state. And I keep hearing that it's at $7,400. Sometimes I hear it's $6,900. And it's just not enough. I've never once heard it's 12 grand a kid.
People don't often, and it's probably higher than that now. Those are old numbers. So
where do those numbers come from?
They're from the Department of Education. So these are not me just making these up or doing sort of math tricks in a back office somewhere. This is straight from the state government in terms of all of the money that flows into this thing, even outside the School Finance Act. It's about $12,500 per kid. Now, even within that, you've got variation. So before we said you have districts to get more, you have districts to get less. That's true here. There are school districts in the state, and I won't name names today, but they're taking in $90,000 to $100,000 per pupil. Districts with very few students who are bringing in that kind of money.
What? Hold on. There are districts that are bringing in $90,000 per kid per year.
Correct.
Like where?
If you add everything up. So one example would be Creed, which is bringing in about $90,000 per kid.
Where's Creed?
I don't know that I could tell you where Creed is. That's embarrassing, but I'm not sure I know where Creed is. You've got a few other places that are...
Because it's a badass name for a school district.
It is a pretty cool name.
Yeah.
You have other places,
Creed.
often in Los Animas and other places that are bringing in around that same figure. You have other districts that are bringing in 20 to 25 by the time you add it all up. You have others that are closer to sort of the 9,000, 10,000 mark. So
I once took a look at DPS, and I just took the entire budget and divided it by the kids, and it was close to 18 grand a year. Now that was also to pay off the debt for all the beautiful buildings they have and all the books that are bad. I heard on radio how the instruments don't work and the book bindings are bad. But I looked at it and said, 18 grand a kid, that's a lot of money. So this also includes the capital costs?
It does. It includes the stuff that you just mentioned. So, you know, stuff that you're having to do with debt financing and all of the sort of stuff involved with capital costs, that's included in the number. But at the end of the day, they're getting benefit out of those things. I mean, those things cost money. They are using them. Yes, the revenue is going to pay for them, but we shouldn't discount it because we are talking about stuff that the school district is making use of.
If you were to send your kid to a private school, what does it usually cost in Colorado? I know the Archdiocese does some incredible things for lower income people, and there are schools out there who are helping kids at $4 grand a year to educate a kid. That includes the buildings, which usually aren't very nice, and they get some subsidy usually from the Archdiocese or some other organization. But how does that compare to a private school?
So average tuition for private schools in the state is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $7,000 per kid. So you're talking, that's the actual tuition cost. There are other schools, I've talked to one up in Longmont, they charge $100 a month to families who want to go there. There are other schools where
the average cost is $7 grand a month.
That's what
or $7 grand a kid.
That's what
per
they
year.
charge on average.
So you're telling me the average for sending your kid, or what we get for public education, is 12 grand, but the average for private schools is 7 grand.
True. I mean, you have to be a little careful because they've got some fundraising operations on the back end, although I'll point out that public schools and public school districts also have major fundraising operations on their back end. So how that shakes out depends on what you're looking at. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it is cheaper to educate a kid in the private sector than the public sector. That is very much true.
It's just that we don't see the full costs. It reminds me, and I'm going to lose the last three of our viewers. It reminds me of the Gallagher Amendment in property taxes, that people here in Colorado talk to their friends out east and say, yeah, my taxes on my house this year are $3,000. And the guy from New York goes, oh my God, that's such a deal. But we hide the rest of the property taxes in commercial buildings, which means you're still paying for them when you buy products and services. When you go to King Soopers, that gets built into the cost. You're still paying for it, but it's not transparent. It's not upfront. So if we brought up the cost for kids and made them transparent, it comes out to about 12 grand a kid.
Yeah, on average, that's right, if you add up everything.
Incredible. All right, explain this other thing to me that I keep hearing, which is called the negative factor. That, well, see how underfunded schools are. We even have a negative factor. We owe them money. They're so underfunded. We owe them money.
So you're going to lose the last couple of viewers. I'm sorry. The negative factor is the cue. So the negative factor depends on how you look at it. If you look at it the way that the state government looks at it when they actually apply it as a factor in the school finance formula, it is a negative number that they stick into the factors, importantly not the base, because the Constitution doesn't let us touch base funding, but they can touch factor funding. And so they stick this negative number in, they apply it evenly across the board, and what happens is that number really is a reflection of all the other stuff the government has to pay for. So if you really dig into this, what you find is K-12 education and healthcare and human services are locked in sort of a budgetary death match with one another, where one thing is sucking up all of this money and the other thing really wants it but can't get it. And so you're seeing slowly but surely other aspects of the state government clawing money out of education. That's where the negative factor comes from. If you ask let
me take a shot at this.
Sure.
In my simple English. In 2000, I ran a campaign, as most of mine are, patron saint of good but unwinnable causes, against Amendment 23, which we almost won. And it put into the Constitution that we're going to spend more and more every year on education, no matter what. We could have a nuclear war, and we get no money into government, but we're still going to spend more than we did last year because of this. That's the way that's supposed to work. So now we've got outward pressure that this happens at the time when sometimes the economy doesn't work well. Now we've got the Obamacare mandate coming in, and fortunately, Obamacare, they're printing enough dollars and giving them to the states so that it looks like it works. But at some point, when that starts to dry up, and it will, you're going to have now 1 out of every 4 people in Colorado are on Medicaid, and you're going to have those people who want it, and then you're going to have this constitutional amendment that says this has to go, and then everything else gets squeezed out.
Look, the budget is, I think a lot of people don't think of budgets this way, but it's just the pie. And every given year, the pie is only so big. And if you have to make one slice of the pie bigger, you're going to have to make another slice of the pie smaller. And if you get to a point where you've got to make 2 slices bigger, something else is going to bleed. And so it becomes sort of this government against itself situation almost. And in some ways, it's ironic because the very same folks who like to go out and talk a lot about how much more money we need in schools, the negative factor, we're shorting our students, they're often on the same side of the philosophical spectrum that push these other spending things. So in a lot of ways, they have set up this situation where their interests are competing against one another. Sooner or later, and I think in some ways it already has, but it can't end well. It won't end well.
Well, the answer is to raise taxes. It's a pretty simple thing.
Obviously.
That's always the answer. Explain this one to me, that I've been told we're near the last in the nation when it comes to educational funding. And then I talked to a colleague in another state, and he said, wait a second, you're 49th? Our union out here says we're 49th. And I talked to another guy. I know 6 guys in 6 different states who they've been told they're 49th in funding. And you can play this game any way you like. Here they do it as a percentage of personal income. Over there they do it someplace else. What's the truth? Where are we compared to other states?
So I'll start off by saying truth is a relative thing when you're talking about this stuff. It depends on how you measure it. Depends on what you measure. This is the wonk side of it. It depends on how you look at the numbers. But if you want to sit down and look at what I think are the most credible numbers, we are ranked somewhere between 22nd and 40th. And there's huge variation between those. So the funny thing is, U.S. Census Bureau puts us at right about that 40th marker. The National Education Association, their local chapter, CEA, the Colorado Education Association, is one of the big proponents of increased funding. They put us at 22nd. So it really, really does depend on what you look at. It depends on how you measure it. But no matter how you look at it, I haven't come across anything that
the idea that we are not funding schools in this state where they need to be, is that true or false?
That's a tough question. I think that overall, in the aggregate, I think that that's probably not true. The idea that we are going to throw money at this and it's going to be a panacea and it's going to solve all of our educational woes and make things better, I don't think that's true. And I think that if you look at the amount of money that we spend on schools now versus the achievement that we get, the results that we produce, we're outperforming a great many states in the country in terms of what we're actually producing. So if we are interested in education the way we should be interested in all things the government does in terms of outcomes instead of what we put into it, so it's about what we produce, not about how much stuff we can throw at it, then Colorado's doing pretty well. And actually, we should be really talking about how we're doing well in terms of efficiency at producing the outcomes that we need, rather than just for the sake of feeling good, throwing more money at it. So I think the general answer is no. Doesn't mean money can never do anything. Doesn't mean you can't ever leverage money for good things that can produce good outcomes for kids. But overall, is that the answer? No, probably not.
And we didn't even get into the bomb that's going to explode when unfunded pensions start coming up. So, it's going to be good. I'm glad I'm moving to Puerto Rico. No, I'm not. Ross, thank you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned.